Hey Abe, welcome back.
Cool, cool. So what we were talking about, music and
Yeah, the Albuquerque
high
scene.
school. And whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah. I was just talking about Ray Cedillo.
Okay.
He was one of our friends, and he was pretty influential in like exposing a lot of people to music. He ended up building a half pipe. You know, we used to hang out at his house, and everybody would skate. There was several times where the half pipe was a stage for bands that were passing through. Um, I'm sure every one of us has some sort of crazy story of being down there and dealing with that scene. Lots of good times, lots of chaos and craziness. But I think that was cool because he was having, there was no place for punk bands to play back in the day. So
Ex-
he would always reach out when he was ordering music. You know, you'd have to get little 7-inch albums and look in Maximum Rock and Roll or Flipside or something, and then send your money order, and he would send a letter, hey man, my name's Ray. If anybody ever needs anything, I'm in Albuquerque. And a lot of bands would just drive right through because there wasn't a good scene here. There wasn't any place to play. So we started seeing bands that eventually got pretty big play house parties. Like you were saying, No Effects played down there. There's a whole list of people that played down there. I don't even want to get into it for fear of being wrong. And I saw several shows down there that I was pretty fucked up for. So I don't remember exactly which one was which. So that was good times and also crazy times. But that was a lot of us were first exposed to tattoos back then. Ray was one of the first tattoo artists that I ever met. There was like Ray and Big Ed, and then eventually I met Jamie Trujillo, who was like a little bit older but pretty influential. I'd started seeing tattoos on some of the punk dudes around the neighborhood, and started asking them, and then a couple of dudes from high school started showing up with tattoos. A bunch of the skinhead dudes that we used to hang out with started getting tattooed by Ray, and I wasn't quite ready to get tattooed yet because I was still like selling a lot of drugs at that point. Mid late '80s. But that was when I met my first bunch of like local underground tattoo guys. Um, and we all eventually came up together. But Ray was a big part of the music thing also, as far as like being one of those dudes that you were like, hey man, I'm all out of tunes, man. Turn me on to something cool. And he'd always like, cassette tape back in the day, burn you a tape or whatever, record you a tape. Um, but that was like mid high school where my mom's place was falling apart. My dad was kind of getting ready to move out of town, and Ray lived at the other end of High Street from where I live. So I'd go BMX over there, hang out and shit. I was spending about half and half, like not living at my house. I had a lot of friends who's I think their parents kind of knew that my mom's situation was kind of out of control. So hindsight's always kind of 2020. You look back and you're like man, I was always getting a lot of invites like, hey, you can just stay the week here or stay the weekend here or whatever. Um, Several of them knew my mom personally, kind of like had even partied with her, but kind of knew that like her capacity for being a responsible parent was limited at that point. And and like I said, my dad, like I don't know, right about the end of high school, he was just moving out of town. He got a job and he was gone. So he hasn't even lived in town since like late '80s, something like that. Um, and then my mom ended up getting kicked out of that place, and uh, I was just hanging out. I was starting to like draw flyers for my friends' house parties and shit, and um, bouncing out of town. Like I had to kind of keep like some of the older guys that I was like transporting shit for, kind of wanted me to stay out of some of the kind of high school shenanigans that were going on, and there was times where either like family shit with my mom and losing houses, or just having to bounce to go take care of that stuff. Like I would just disappear towards the end of high school. I'd just be, gone for a few weeks, and I'd just like pop back up. And um, of course, by the time I like tried to go back for my last year of high school, they were like, "Yeah, you need all these credits, and you're going to be in high school till you're like 20 something." And I ended up getting arrested on campus, and then I got into a fight with some dude and broke his nose. And at some point, they were pretty much like, until you get all this shit cleared up, like you can't be back on APS campus. I even tried to go to like the alternative school, and they were like, "No, we're still APS. Like all of campus is off limits." So
They
I
wouldn't
was
even
just
take
like,
you
"Okay."
had freedom. What?
I was like, "I'm done. I'm just done." So that was the end of high school. I pretty much, I was pretty much like selling drugs off and on, and then working odd jobs off and on. Didn't really have like a focus, but I was surviving, and I was doing as well or better than I had ever done living with my parents for the most part.
Financially, can't blame a guy for trying
Yeah, I
to
mean,
eat.
I went to school, and I got a bunch of certificates in welding, so I did some welding jobs, and even going there, like I ended up getting into it with a bunch of like students that I was going to welding school with, and
Yeah.
I didn't fit in with them. They had a lot against me because I don't know, I was kind of a punk rock kid, and I was like half living on the streets, living in weird roommate situations, and ended up getting into a fight with like 5 or 6 of those dudes, and just you know got my certificates and just started working for a while. Um, but yeah, I mean, I was paying for my own apartments, and I was for a while I had roommates off and on, and sometimes things would get a little out of control. We had some crazy parties, had the cops called on us a bunch. Uh, I had a crazy roommate pull a gun on us, and pulled it
Well,
on my roommate, and I had to yeah, it was just like like just bouncing around from one crazy situation to another. I think by the time I was 20, I had lived in like 20 different places. I think I counted at one point,
that's a
which
lot.
kind of like yeah, definitely towards the end of high school, and then like getting out of living with my parents, like there was a lot of places I lived. But even with like my parents, there was probably like 12 different places that I'd lived. If you want to add like after they got divorced, counting multiple houses, places where I had stuff spread out all over the place.
I'm still just shocked that you, first of all, survived, and second of all, you've always just been such a genuinely nice, really intelligent guy. I'm so proud of you for being alive, and I would never judge you for all the shit you had to do to feed yourself. Isn't there a
Yeah,
crazy
I
story
was,
about
I was,
the Venetian blinds and the cops looking for the neighbors selling crack?
oh yeah, that was,
Tell us that story. That's kind of
that was,
funny.
that was early 20s, like a little bit before I started tattooing. That was when we were living up in the war zone. Um, I had a couple of roommates, and I'd been out partying all night, maybe all weekend, and so
Okay.
we were
Yeah.
we were living up in the war zone. I had a couple of roommates. I think I think I was working for the college at this time. I used to work for the bookstore over at the community college.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
but I got home, and like it was just like light was just like the sun was just coming up, and I laid down, and it looked like someone was like walking around out in the yard. So I like looked through, and it was like this cop belt, and I heard them like, "Hey, there's someone in there," and they're like slamming on the door. So I opened it up, and they put me against the wall, and they run through the whole house. My roommates at the time were selling weed, so they had like a scale, and they had like all these like big like stocks, but There was no weight
Oh
there. There was just
no.
like a little tiny
No.
bit.
Okay,
And they let
okay.
me up against the wall, and
Okay.
they're like, who drives that red Cadillac? And I was like, that's the crack dealers next door. And they just all leave and like
Left.
go kick in the door of the neighbors. Of course, those guys had heard like the cops like raiding our place, so they all like had bailed already. That
That's
Cadillac,
so
like,
Albuquerque.
yeah, I mean, and they just left me like sitting there in my underwear, you know. Like I had an ounce of weed on my dresser, and they had totally seen it, but it wasn't their priority. Obviously, they were going after the neighbors. Yeah, those guys bailed. They left their car sitting
Sorry.
there. You know, there was like surveillance on the car for like a week. I was like, they're not coming back to get that. That's ridiculous.
I'm
Um,
sorry. That's just such an Albuquerque story. Like you're just going about your
yeah,
business
yeah,
and the cops raid your house.
yeah. I mean, I wasn't even that freaked out by it, you know, because it was just kind of a,
Oh, of
you
course
know,
not.
like whatever. And I knew that me personally, I was like, oh, I wasn't doing anything to warrant this kind of attention, you know. So yeah,
Yeah, okay.
was one of that was one of the 20 plus something places that I lived in, and you know, every
It
place had
just
some sort of
happened.
crazy story, you know, roommates trying to kill,
It's
or
just
not even,
happened
yeah,
here.
roommates pulling guns on each other, and neighbors trying to axe murder each other, and you know, just every kind of cool story you could think of living in crazy little ghetto
Well,
apartments, and crazy
your
roommates and
apartment had
whatnot.
machete. Your apartment had machete marks and crime scene tape on the door, didn't it?
Yeah, yeah, that was the hatchet. That was the axe murder neighbor trying to chase his roommate down, and yeah, yeah. There was a point where I was just like I need to like figure out something, and I kind of want to like not move every like 6 months, or you know, I mean there was years where you know lived at like three different places, maybe four different places, and then you know
Damn.
maybe
Yeah.
stay someplace a year or two, and then you know like I said towards the end of high school it was like you know every 4 months, every 6 months or something, just you know new place, different whatever, different situation, different crazy roommates, whatever. Um, but you know, I think when I was like 20, 21, I like met some chick and we like got an apartment and I bought a color TV for myself. I was like, this is fucking cool. Uh,
Oh,
and I was trying to I was trying to like pull back from like being a career drug dealer. Like, you know that the options on that
criminal.
are pretty limited. You know, your future's gonna write itself on that one. And then
Well, it's the 90s now too, right? People
yeah,
are our friends are doing, and some of them aren't surviving.
oh
Other people are
yeah,
doing other shit, and they're not surviving. It's a good time to get a
yeah,
job, real job.
yeah. And I mean, I'd always had jobs off and on because you know selling drugs wasn't a reliable income, and I probably wasn't highly motivated, you know. Um, but I I think right about then is when I kind of like mellowed out a little bit, and I actually started getting tattooed a little bit. Started like reconnecting with some of that scene, maybe doing a little bit more like artwork and shit. Um, and that's kind
Who
of
tattooed you first?
so. I had been hanging out with you know with our crowd, Ray and his little end of it, Running Bear and fucking um, and you can bleep his fucking name. Um,
I will.
Big
Got it.
Big Ed and um, you know, I knew that like JB was getting into it a little bit, and my friend Steve and my friend Tim, still like Robert. You know, there was a crazy amount of people from our like age group of our generation, our era that like became tattooers because tattooing was kind of super underground and taboo. You know, it was real like you had to be a sailor or a
Yeah.
criminal or a whore or something. You know,
Yeah.
but
Was
punk
not
rock really changed
mainstream.
that. You know, um,
It did.
all even the
Me
metal
too.
bands were starting to get tattooed, and by the '90s, it was definitely becoming more popular. Um, but I had waited to get tattooed, and a lot of the people that I knew had left town because you couldn't get an
Oh,
apprenticeship.
yeah.
So
Okay.
they were going
Oh,
to
there.
L.A. or they're going to San Francisco or like Denver, or like anywhere that had like an established scene.
Hmm.
But I had known all the old biker dudes forever, and I asked around, and most of the good tattoos that I was seeing were out of Route 66, out of Fine Line. And so I ended up going up there, and Brian Everett did my first tattoo. Old man Brian.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah, and I was trying to track down all the homies, but like everyone was like so transient and still kind of learning how to do their thing. And then eventually I went back to get some more work done, and my buddy Cap was working there. Rest in peace, Cap Stumsky. And he looked at like what I had brought in. I brought in my own little sketch, and he just kind of shook his head and was like, let me get the new guy. And he brought out JB. JB had gotten a job over there. I knew that he had been tattooing kind of, but I kind of given up on trying to track down everyone. We didn't have like the same
Hmm.
access to internets and cell phones and
No.
whatever. JB's like totally down because it's like whatever the new cool stuff is. Bunch of Swiss cheese, cosmic snot shit, and some fucking tribal stuck in there, whatever. But me and my girlfriend started hanging out there a little bit, getting tattooed, and kind of reconnected with JB because I'd known him like I don't know, mid school, high school. We'd show up at the same parties and shit. Chris was working the counter, and I'd known him forever. A friend of mine was married to Cap, so like all of a sudden I was kind of like, all right, this is cool. More into like tattooing and tattoo history. This is probably like '89 or '90. Tattoo magazines
Okay.
that started coming out.
Okay.
Um, but it was like kind of a closed door to tattooing. You really kind of had to know someone to get the right info, and nobody wanted to give up the goods. And it didn't really occur
Everybody's
to me.
competing at that point.
Yeah, well, I mean, tattooing traditionally was always kind of like apprentice based, and no one really wanted to pass on like the secrets. You didn't want to make more competition, and it's still
No.
that way a little bit. There's a lot of gatekeeping
Sure.
to it and whatever.
Sure.
But I started getting into tattoos and drawing a lot more. Like I was drawing shit when I was at work, and I was drawing shit like I was taking classes every now and then, drawing on the side of my notes and whatever. But the more I hung out at shops, the more I kind of figured out like where you could get stuff. I started paying more attention to what people were using. I started getting tattooed a lot and watching the equipment and stuff. And then a little bit after that, like early '90s, '91 or something. Some of my friends started moving back. Big Ed moved back because he had been out in San Francisco. And whenever he'd come back to town, he was just killing it, like he was just doing crazier and crazier shit. Um, but he was also doing a lot of stuff. Even the shop that he was working out there was like kind of known for when he was out in San Francisco, he was working at Earth, and that place was kind of notorious for taking in all the crazies, really talented people, but they catered to the crazy '90s tattooer.
The brilliant
But
artists.
yeah, and then the crazy artists, the
That's
insane ones,
yeah, yeah, the craziest. Same
but
thing.
brilliant at
Yeah,
the
it's a
same
brilliant
time.
and crazy artist. It goes together.
But at some point, he moved back and started tattooing. I was like one of the first people to find him, and actually like got the first tattoo out of this little shop that he was gonna rent. It wasn't even like remodeled yet. It was just like it's still carpet on the floor and no walls or nothing. It was just like a back storage room. Had a bunch of like cardboard boxes everywhere, and we just kind of fashioned a little like tattoo station. And um,
Nice.
started tattooing. I got like the first tattoo out of that spot. But eventually, all the homies came in and helped him remodel it, put up some little walls and stuff, and he started working there. And he took on a couple of people, and then of course he got like you know some mission to go to Seattle up there, and
Oh,
was kind of managing some shop for our friends, and he was doing all right up there, but like, I mean, it was Ed. He did his thing. So he left his shop and left it to some friends, and so I was hanging out there quite a bit. And JB had left Fine Line by then for the same kind of reasons. Um, he didn't want to fit into the Route 66 thing, which I totally understand. And so he started his own little shop. And so I was just hanging out at both of those shops, just going back and forth. They were both like Nob Hill, UNM kind of area, right on
yeah.
Central. And and eventually I quit working at the college. Um, I just like the bureaucracy of it, and like the boss that I had was like, turned out she was embezzling all kinds of money from like the
Oh
store, and
no.
like
Oh no.
taking us over on all this shit. And I could kind of feel the vibe was bad, and I was like, I went and worked at like some corporate job, like Office Depot kind of shit, and hated that. And I kind of just like went back, kind of regressed a little bit, and was just like, man, I'm just gonna let one of my homies move into my apartment so we don't gotta pay shit, and we're just gonna roam around and
I
get
see.
high and
Yeah.
sell drugs again,
Yeah.
and eventually we just stopped paying rent there, and we just graffitied the inside of the apartment. It was just like all kinds of tattoo artists and graffiti artists, and all these random people just partying there. But at some point when I was there, I was drawing up all these tattoo designs, and one of the tattoo artists that was hanging out was like, "Hey, could I buy all these off of you?" And that kind of got the wheels turning, and I was like, "No, I think I'm
Oh.
gonna hang on to them," because I was like, "How much would you charge for those?" And I've had like some people have me like draw tattoos for them, and like I finally ordered some catalogs and was kind of like dragging my feet on it. I was kind of like, I don't know. And then at some point, I was just like kind of over, like we were like we'd left that apartment, and I was just like sofa surfing. I was just living at people's houses, and you know somebody would want to score something, and I would like facilitate it and go up to their place and stay there for a couple of days, and then somebody else would want this, and I'd go back down to the other side of town. And at some point getting my started getting motivated, and I had like a little bit of money left over from working at the college, and bought like the bare minimum like tattoo stuff. I had to learn how to make needles and all kinds of shit. Like you could buy pre-made needles, but they were like $6 each or $8 each, and like this is early '90s, so that was like 25-30 dollars for a damn needle. But you could buy all the stuff to make needles for $50 or something, and I already
Well,
knew
that
how
was
to.
part of the skill, right? Part of
Yeah,
the
I mean,
skill. You're not a tattoo artist at that point if you can't.
yeah, it was definitely a
Some of
different
the things
world
you
as
had to
far as,
know.
and this is one of the reasons that I kind of put getting into it, because I was like, man, you got to make all your own stuff. You gotta, I'd
Yeah.
go to the shops and I would see
Yeah.
my buddies like making needles and shit, and but eventually I got interested in like I'd go over and like smoke a joint with them, and then they'd be like, yeah, well, just hang out and bullshit. I got to make needles, and then I started paying attention to like what they were doing,
Yeah. Yeah.
and eventually I ordered most of the stuff I needed, and I just started like trying it. I had taken welding, so I knew how to solder. I just needed to figure out how they were shaped and why you did it that way. Tried to ask questions without like pissing anyone off or being too obvious about it. I had one or two friends that like I was pretty open with, like, hey man, I'm gonna try and learn how to do this, and they were kind of like, no, you don't want to, blah blah, and I'd be like, yeah, but fucking tell me how to why you do this, or what's in that fucking bottle or whatever. little things that I couldn't figure out. Most of the tattoo companies, you needed like someone to vouch for you before they'd sell to you. Um,
Yeah.
so I ended up stealing a catalog so I could like get the numbers and then taking it back to the shop. It was this guy that was working for some friends of mine, and he was a fucking douchebag. So like I was just like, ah, fuck this guy. Um, they used to send all these inserts, so I took one of the inserts and it had like the number, and I bullshitted my way into like like they're like, well, if you don't have this or that or blah blah, you got to at least like have a letterhead and a business card. So I just took a business card and it had a blank back on it, and I just drew tattoos by Abe or whatever on the
Yeah.
back of it.
Nice.
And this is back when like fax machines were like high tech, so I took it
Yeah.
and got it faxed over to them, and they were like, all right, well, here's your customer number and we'll send you a catalog. And everything's mail order, so you had to wait a week for your catalog. And then once I got the catalog and I knew how much everything cost, I was able to like make my budget. And
Start
you know
planning. Yeah.
I ordered one tattoo machine and it was like came disassembled, so I had to like you know go get some of my friends to be like, hey man, let me look at your machine. How do I solder this together? And all my friends had only been tattooing for a few years, and I think we ended up fucking that machine up, and I had to take parts from one of theirs to get mine running. But eventually, I got one running machine. Figured out how to make some needles, tattooed myself, and then started hitting up all of my hardcore like tweaker and junkie friends that had like horrible prison tattoos and jailhouse homemade shit. The first couple of tattoos I ever did were like helping guys with homemade machines. We'd be sitting in some hotel room waiting for like dope to be ready or delivered or for us to take it someplace, and they'd pull out their little battery powered like homemade rig, and they knew I could draw, so they'd be like, "Hey, I can't reach the spot. Can you help me?" Like, and I was like, "Yeah, whatever." And that happened a few times. So those were technically my first like tattoos that I did. But I got all my stuff. Here's a cool story too. I couldn't everything that I needed. So uh like my first bottle of black tattoo ink, I went to the art store. There used to be a little art supply store on like Central and Stanford or something, and they had all these signs that were like, "This ink's not for tattooing," because people were always like buying it and coming back and being like, "Look, you just fucked up my arm," and they're like, "Yeah, that's like Hagen's fucking pen ink. Like, what the fuck?" But once I figured out what I needed, like I knew that like there was a certain brand of ink that was like kind of the standard at the time. But they sold it at that art supply store, and so I just went and fucking stole a bottle. I was just like, I'm just gonna
Oh
go fucking
no.
do this in my I was out of money. Like I needed to start tattooing, and I was living on people's fucking sofas. I started dating this chick, and she was like, "Yeah, you can stay at my house and you can learn how to tattoo out of my kitchen." And I was like, "Cool." She ended up becoming my kid's mom eventually,
Well,
but
okay.
yeah, but that's kind of how I met her. Was like, hey, me and my roommate are selling weed, and like, hey, now I'm homeless. Can I just like stay at your house? And then at some point, we were like hooking up, and then she was like, yeah, you can just learn how to tattoo out of here. So that was you know me pretty much like starting completely over, like starting from sleeping on sofas again, and but yeah, like I just got all my random friends that had horrible tattoos and was like, I can't do anything worse on you than what you have. And then I started
So
like,
were you covering those up, or you're just giving them other tattoos as you
sometimes I'd just
practice?
give them other tattoos, but like, I don't know, after the first couple of tattoos and I was actually able to put the black in a little bit, like I started re-outlining and reworking some of their stuff, and then, started like learning how to shade, and I shaded some of their stuff in. And then I think after I tattooed for like a month or two, I actually got enough people to like give me money that I was able to order like, I think I ordered like four
Yeah.
colors, just like primary colors. I could make like oranges and purples and like greens and stuff out of like the primaries. So I just ordered like four bottles of colored pigment and just learned how to mix my own colors out of it, and started taking on color tattoos, learning how to pack that stuff in there. And then I think within like 6 months of getting into it, I was probably working for the homies, because I knew a bunch of people that had shops and just kept bugging them, taking pictures. You take a picture with your camera and have to go get it developed, and then hopefully one of those pictures came out, and then go to the shop and be like, oh look, I didn't fuck this one up too bad. So yeah, I started tattooing in a shop like, so this is probably '93 when I started, probably '94 when I was actually like doing okay with tattoos and got a job in a shop, and then I was probably in a shop for like 8 months, and my girlfriend was like, "Hey, I'm pregnant," you know. So I was planning on learning how to tattoo and take it off. I was gonna go travel around and
Yeah,
do
really.
whatever. But yeah, so that kind of changed the course. I didn't want to like
You're
bail.
24, 24 at the
Yeah,
time?
yeah, 20, 23, 24. Um, and so he was born in '95, so he's like 30 this year, which is kind of crazy to think about.
What's
Um,
his what's his name? What's his
Isaac,
name? Hi,
yeah,
Isaac.
Isaac Krasko. But he kind of changed the course because I was like, well, I don't want to bail out. And the guys I was working for, they ended up like changing locations, um, and then they got into a big old argument, and one of them split town, and
Oh,
I took I took like a month or something off to like hang out with the kid. And then when I came back to the shop, homie was gone, and I was working with this other dude. And then that shop ended up kind of closing after a few months. And then I was like kind of doing the Mr. Mom thing because my my kid's mom at the time was like going to college and getting her master's degree, and I was just kind of taking care of the kid and then just trying to like tattoo in the evenings when I could. And then at some point, uh, these two guys tried to rob me when I was like going to do like a consult with them. They said they knew somebody that knew someone, and um, yeah, I turned around and they fucking hit me with a hammer, like a carpenter's hammer, and
oh no.
got, yeah, I got a big old dent in the back of my head from that.
No.
But then
And that was you were what were you doing?
I was tattooing out of my house. I had like a little studio, and this is like the middle of the day. They ended up being these little gangster kids that like knew these guys that lived next door to me, and they ended up having all kinds of problems. Like there was a big old party, and they had a stabbing over there. Like this was like before I knew like what was going on. Long fucking story with them, but
Mm-hmm.
it was just me and my kids. So they like, hit me with this hammer and tried, probably thought I had a bunch of money or something. But I was like, fuck, I've only been tattooing like a year and a half, and I'm not even in the shop right now. I'm like
Mm-hmm.
tattooing
Yeah.
out of my house. And that kind of was like, man, there's not like, there was probably 6, 8, 10 shops that were even worth tattooing in, and they were all small. Only had like, a couple of 3, 4 people at any time working at them. Um, so like right around then, my buddy came back from Texas. He was tattooing out in Austin, and we were both tattooing out of my house, but we were like doing it when we were both there. And and then we got offered this little tiny space, and this was like 90 late '96, '97. We started our own little shop, and then I don't know. We had a couple of different locations. Like you remember the spot on San Pedro, and then we had a spot downtown on like 7th Street, um, and that was some crazy times, um, like gangsters and skinheads and all kinds of
No,
shit.
really.
Yeah, cops and helicopters and yeah, just all kinds
Oh,
of
that's the knees in Albuquerque.
yeah. This was like mid late '90s because we had the spot on San Pedro, and then it got bought out because we were right where that bowling alley is, San Pedro and Manal,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they got bought out by Staples, and they were like, "Yeah, you guys gotta go." And then we moved downtown, but like right before the landlord came and told us we had to move the shop, me and my kid's mom split up. And then like that
Oh
same month,
no.
they were like, "Oh, now you got to
Oh
move the shop."
no.
So I was just like, "Ah, great." By the time we moved the shop downtown, like I spent the first like month or two like living in the shop because I had to give up my apartment. Like I think we had the shop open for like a month, and then I had to give up my apartment because I put all my money into moving the shop.
Oh, honey.
And then
This is why you're so evolved. You got broad shoulders, man. Handle a
you
lot
just
of stuff.
got to keep pushing through. Um,
Yep.
and some point around then I started doing like a lot of tattoo conventions and shit. Just trying to get out of town. Albuquerque was kind of small, and
Yeah.
it was kind of tried to start like branching out and just getting some exposure, hanging out with other artists, and um, starting to like focus on like doing some like bigger work on people and stuff. Um, and then I think I was there. I was there until 2001. Like I remember, I ended up selling out my partnership, and I was kind of tattooing out of my house again for a minute, and then went for full circle. I got a call, and it was Brian Everett, and he was like, "Hey man, I heard you need a job." So I ended up going.
Yeah.
Yeah, I ended up going and working for Brian, and
Yay.
this was like right after 9/11. So like the tattoo
Oh
business kind of
no.
like sunk.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it
Everything
was like
changed.
yeah, it was like the end of the world. Nobody. I was like, I was tattooing out of a friend of mine's little tiny shop, and like for like 2 weeks, like nothing even happened. And I went to a tattoo convention out in California, which like almost nobody went to because it was like you couldn't fly anywhere. But when I came back, Brian had offered me that job, and at first I had told him like no, nah, but after 9/11, I was like, hey man, I'm just
Yeah.
gonna skip over there and like hopefully just being right in the middle of Nob Hill because he used to have a different shop, like he used to have two shops, and I went to the one in Nob Hill and it was actually all right. My customers started kind of coming back around, and that was cool for a couple of years, and then um, I think right about then I got like a back piece that I did got in a magazine and shit. So like tattooing kind of like leveled out. It was kind of cool to like just work for someone else, not be like bouncing from shop to shop, not be like hustling and not being in charge of a shop. Because there was no way I should have been in charge of a shop like way back then. We were letting way too much shit go on. I mean, we had a great time, but we weren't really focused on business as much. um, but yeah, I mean, ever since then, I've just kind of, that was probably my first 10 years of tattooing. Ever since then, I've
You're
been
just
pretty
working.
pretty chill and stable. Bounced around to a couple of shops, and after I left Fine Line, I went to a friend's shop, and then um, went and worked for my friend Jason over at Tinta Cantina, and I was there for 14 years or something, um, up until basically up until COVID. Like right before COVID, I left there. Um, yeah, after COVID, I came over to this spot that I'm at, and I've been here for almost 5 years now. So
It's
definitely
really
mellowed
nice
out.
there.
Like a pretty stable. Um, tried to not move houses as much. I've lived in several places in the last like 20 years, but it's been significantly less than originally. I've
Oh
managed to
shit.
stay.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I've managed to stay at most places for I don't know 5 years, couple of years. I got married at some point. We bought a house, played house for a while, got divorced, and yeah, now we're here. And that's
That
pretty
place is
much.
great now. It's kind of like
Yeah, it's
just a
a cool
studio.
shop. Yeah, it's just, well, so the funny thing is, my booth that I'm in right now is twice as big as the first shop I ever tattooed in.
Really,
Yeah,
really.
tattooing back in the day was, Ed in the back room of somebody else's business. Even even like the original fine line, like our standard for like booths back in the day were like, as long as I could put a chair in it and a customer were good. I remember me and JB
Yeah.
when he was tattooing me, his room was so small the two of us could barely fit in there. I'd be like basically hanging out the door. His booth was tiny, and we were both pretty decent sized guys, so it's definitely more
Now you got
comfortable.
like a machine shop. You got a machine shop
Yeah,
back there.
yeah, and that was the other end of like learning to tattoo in the '90s is if you broke something on your machine, you had to learn how to fix it. So early on, I was like bugging everybody, and anytime I'd travel around and do a guest spot, I was like, trying to get any little tidbit on machines, and so eventually, just be able to rebuild whatever you had, which eventually led to just building them from scratch. I don't really do a whole lot of it anymore. It's a lot of work compared to, I don't know, the amount of money you make making machines, the amount of like stuff you got to do and time you put into it is more a labor of love these days. I like to work on machines for people, and every now and then I'll build myself one, but I'm kind of like low key on that. I also try and keep my tattoo schedule pretty light these days. I've been tattooing since '93, so 30 plus years. Try and keep the eyes and the hands and the back and all
No
that stuff.
kidding.
So,
No
um,
kidding. It's
a lot of wear
I
and
think
tear.
it's a lot of work for you guys. You're not just drawing, you're not just drawing, but then you're also making your own needles and repairing your own machines and running your own
Yeah.
businesses and looking for studios and partying along the way. Like this is
Oh
a
yeah. A lot of
seriously
partying.
demanding
A lot
lifestyle.
of
No, but
partying.
it's hard on your bodies and your hands. A
Yeah.
lot of what?
A lot of partying back in the day. But
A lot of partying.
it's kind of sad these days because like a lot of the original people that I started with just they're just not around anymore because
No.
Ray, he died in the '90s. He got shot.
Yeah.
You know JB, he died in the '90s. Big Ed, he died like 4 years ago or
Recently.
something. Um,
Yeah, that
so a
really
lot of
hurts.
the core guys that I was hanging out with and working, like you start looking at it and you're like, man, it's like getting to be one of the last old timers. It's cool to see Marty still around.
Yeah.
Uh, there's a few of the old heads that I still talk to and run into, and it's cool to see them. But like that really kind of gritty core group of guys that like we were
Started it
hanging out with
all.
back then. Like to see you know a good half of them not even make it out of the '90s. It's like
Yeah. But
because
the 90s were so dark. I mean, I wasn't here for it, but every time I came home, it just seemed like a really rough time on all of you.
yeah, yeah. I think by then everybody's bad habits or addictions or whatever had like really like set
Taken
in,
over.
like become lifestyle as much as just bad habits. And I was pretty lucky that I don't know, I was just able to hang with that crowd and party with everyone, but I never went full full on into
Yeah.
it. I was always able to
Yeah.
like I don't know. I was always able to get sick of the situation and do something else.
Move on to
Um,
something
which
else.
which sometimes meant hanging
It's
out
all
with a
that
totally
acid
different
you took. It
crowd.
made your brain
Yeah,
evolved. Uh,
but yeah,
it
sometimes you
was
just
really,
gotta
think
not
about
hang
it.
out with people. Just to kind of move on.
Well, yeah, sometimes, yeah, there's that. But I mean, Ray and Ed, Ray brought tattooing and punk rock, and then Ed brought more tattooing, was right in the middle of all the punk rock.
Yeah. Well,
And then
and
there was the
Edward,
skateboarding and Albuquerque and the music.
yeah, Ed was a big
It
part
was
with
just,
the punk rock too.
yeah,
He brought in his own style to people and turned a lot of people on into what he was into. Same with Ray. But yeah, I mean, we were all into heavy metal and punk rock and skateboards and graffiti and comic books and a lot of that stuff we brought into tattooing, which was all like new, like the guy was talking about the old biker guys just being like, here, you need to talk to someone your own age about these designs.
You have favorite comic books, don't you? The real old school black and white stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I got into, comics like everyone else did, DC, Marvel, whatever. The stuff that really appealed to me was like, you know, Mad Magazine and underground comics.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd always find like, I don't know, weird shit, Zippy the Pinhead and Zap Comics, like weird furry freak brothers kind of shit.
Yeah.
I think the way I was growing up, like Superman and Batman and Spider Man were just so
Mainstream.
fantastically not even mainstream. Like I just couldn't relate.
I couldn't relate.
But you read
You're a
some of
more an
these
underground kind of guy.
like old comics and even like Mad Magazine, which is just satire. Like I think the making fun of the mainstream always appealed to me pretty early on, and then
Okay.
reading like the counterculture stuff, like the Freak Brothers, like every episode's about them like trying to get laid or trying to get high or trying to, there's always some sort of shit. And you'd read the underground comics, and there was boobs and sex and drugs and rock and roll, and you read Superman, and it's cool, and I like the stories, but he's kind of like square middle class guy that works for the corporate paper, and then he like is undefeatable and nothing. He might get beat up a little bit, but he's Superman.
You're a pirate, Abe. You've always been a
Yeah,
pirate.
I've always, even in the tattoo world, we were always kind of pirates. Being tattoo artists is kind of like being a pirate, but even amongst pirates, me and my crew were always kind of even
The
notorious for being
pirates.
a little bit more piratey than the rest.
A little bit more.
Yeah, there was a
Less
while.
organized, more street, more underground.
Yeah, even when I was doing a lot of conventions, we were kind of notorious for showing up and fucking shit up and getting the cops called on us, or passing out in the
It's a hell
lobby
of a.
all drunk, or I've got a
That's.
bunch of stories like that over the years. But yeah, I mean, it was kind of like, oh, you're inviting that crew that's gonna be a party. We
Yeah.
drank a couple of hotels out of tequila, like completely. Like they're like, there's no more tequila left in any of the bars. Like we drank all of it, you guys, because we were from Albuquerque, and everyone's like wants to party with the Albuquerque dudes, and we're like, all right, you got to.
Just because the Albuquerque dudes are notorious for drinking extra, or
Yeah,
just crazy. But he wants
no,
to
I
be
mean,
phrased with the crazy crew.
kind of like you were saying, just that whole like crazy Albuquerque kind of thing. Like we just kind of like perpetuated that with our tattoo shops, and just kind of like I don't
Fucking
know,
psychos.
we would show up, and we'd represent Merke. We were the crazy Albuquerque
Quite
crew.
well.
And
Quite well. So much
and
so
that's
I have to make a podcast about it now.
yeah, right. And that's cool for a while until like I mean it's only sustainable for so long.
Yeah. We're
Yeah,
trying to build
yeah,
businesses. It's a
yeah.
work
There's a
each
couple of
day.
times where you're out of state running from the cops, and you're like, huh, probably isn't the best. This isn't the most responsible
Yeah.
thing to do. Um, but
No shit. Yeah.
uh, I mean, I haven't actually ever been arrested since I turned 18, so no regret.
Those were just your days across campus, just messing with the UNM
Yeah,
cops.
I mean,
But the more I think about it, the more I remember the stories.
you gotta learn your lessons. I mean,
Yes.
there's
Yes.
so many times when we were teenagers that I was in handcuffs sitting on a curb. Luckily, most of the times we got let go. But I mean, how many crazy parties and events and whatever did we go to where
All of
it
them.
just turned to chaos?
All of them.